really? Do I need to be like playing like Yo-Yo Ma? And the answer is no, of course you don't have to play like Yo-Yo Ma, because none of us can play like Yo-Yo Ma. But what you have to do is be able to show your own particular imagination, your artistic vision. And just playing the notes well, in tune, perfectly, all that is not good enough anymore. So while we prepare for an audition, it's not, you do absolutely need to like nail down all the technical aspects of your playing. But along with that, you need to be able to imbue your own artistic vision and be able to connect past the screen, across the audience, across a concert hall with the person who's listening to you. And that is what we're looking for in a major symphony orchestra.
Hey everybody, this is Chris from HonestyPill.com. You're listening to episode 30 of the Honesty Pill podcast. This season on the show, I'll be talking to people who are breaking the status quo, ditching outdated traditions, and building a better future for themselves and the people they work with. I'll be connecting you with musicians, sound healers, coaches, hip-hop artists, actors, audition experts, and people who not only inspire and educate every single day, but who are experts at talking about what they do so you can get inspired in your own work. My guest today is the founder of Audition Confidential, coaching for musicians, and a cellist with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Gloria Lum. If you've ever wanted a helicopter view of the orchestral audition process, taken an audition and not advanced, or been involved at an audition where nobody even got hired, this episode is for you. Gloria is going to unpack exactly what committees are looking for and give you some strategic ways to make sure you are giving it to them when it counts under pressure. And a quick announcement that Gloria's program, the 360 Method to Audition Preparation, specifically designed by a cellist to help cellists nail their auditions, is launching in a few weeks. You're going to find out where you can book a totally free discovery call and learn more about that during our conversation. Okay, let's hop into this chat with Gloria and find out what rocket science has to do with audition strategy. Here we go. Over the last 5 years, I definitely feel like Honesty Pill coaching has become an actual job. So whenever I have an LA Phil colleague on my podcast, I feel like it's Bring Your Friends to Work Day. Welcome to the show, Gloria.
Thank you so much, Chris.
So let's jump in here. As a cellist in an orchestra, you literally have a front row seat to some of the world's greatest musicians, conductors, soloists, and just the people you sit around every day at work. I'm way in the back in the trumpet section, so I don't get to engage in the same way that you do. And as a member of the audition committee, and even as a chairperson of the audition committee, you've also listened to hundreds of auditions on almost every instrument in the orchestra. And that's definitely something I want to talk about later. But was being a performer always the plan for you? Was an orchestral cellist something you dreamed about as a child? How did you end up here?
Yes, I think I have always wanted to play in an orchestra. When I was growing up, that was definitely part of how I learned how to play from 4th grade on. I always played in an orchestra. And I have to say, I love the fact that there is this sense of camaraderie. As musicians, as we try and become better at our craft, we spend a lot of times by ourselves in the practice room. And so then to be able to come out and play with your friends, make a different kind of music, and really be part of something much larger than what you personally can create is really magical.
Did you go to public school, private school? Like what situation were you in where there was an orchestra available to you in 4th grade?
I grew up in Berkeley, California, which has a long and very rich history of music education. So right off the bat, I started playing the cello in grade school because it was made available to us. We had to sign up for what instruments we wanted to play, and I really wanted to play the clarinet because I thought, oh, those are really cool. It looked like such a cool instrument with all those like keys and stuff. And my brother said to me, oh, play the cello. Nobody plays the cello. And I went, oh, okay.
With all the reeds and torture that happens in the clarinet section, I'd say you dodged a bullet there, Gloria.
I think so, too. But yeah, I think so. When I was growing up in Berkeley, like I said, we had a really rich public school environment. We had great musicians. We actually played Mahler too when I was in high school.
What?
Which is, it's just crazy. When I think about it now, because we had a great chorus. I think we had 2 ringers in the entire orchestra who were adults, and the rest of it were all students. And it was, I think it was probably a very credible performance by high schoolers. Mahler too. Can you believe it?
I cannot even begin to wrap my head around that. Actually, your whole experience doesn't resonate with me at all because I had no clue about orchestras until I got kind of into college. When I was a freshman, I heard a senior play this thing called excerpts in one of our Tuesday trumpet classes. And I'm like, what are these? I mean, I went to see the New York Philharmonic. I listened to orchestral music, but I wasn't aware that it was something that I could do. My high school experience was much more jazz band, band, playing in the wind ensemble, brass ensembles, basically trumpet jock nonsense. So I kind of missed out on that early education. But, it's great that that was something that's been part of your training. Is Suzuki cello a thing? Like, what was the sort of the methodology that you learned?
I was not a Suzuki student, and I'm so old that I think it was just starting at that time. So I don't know that many people did it in my area. There were some really great like violin and cello teachers who were not Suzuki method teachers. They were just sort of old school. And they were the ones who sort of, I think, grew up. We all grew up with this particular set of teachers who really kind of imbued us with a tremendous amount of, I'd say, sort of old school teaching and learning. So yeah, it was not quite the same thing.
So you played Mahler 2 in high school. Okay. I'm wrapping my head around that. Do you remember the first piece that you performed?
Gosh, I can kind of remember myself sitting in the orchestra room, and it was Russian Sailor's Dance, I think. That was part of it. But to go back to high school, not only did the Berkeley High School Orchestra, was it amazing, we also had at least 2 really great youth orchestras in the area. And the youth orchestra that I was in was called the Oakland Symphony Youth Orchestra. And we actually, when I was a junior, went to Berlin to take part in the Youth Orchestra Festival there. And we got to see the Berlin Philharmonic. We got to hear, we saw, it was actually the Herbert von Karajan Festival for youth orchestras.
I'd have to just say that it sounds like you had so many incredible opportunities. And I don't know, I just wonder what kids right now, are they going to Berlin? Or do they know about Herbert von Karajan? I think that you were exposed to a very high level of orchestral just experience that most people don't have.
I think you're right. And, when I think about the training, especially from that youth orchestra, we worked with Dennis Dicateau, who at the time, I think, was also the conductor, or later became the one of the music directors of the San Francisco Ballet Orchestra. We were told right from the very beginning how to behave professionally, not only on stage, but off stage, like when we're traveling. And I think I just love the whole milieu of being in an orchestra, of being part of something bigger. It just kind of fit my personality. So I don't think I ever really thought about any sort of other professional path for myself.
Professional etiquette is something trumpet players learn very, very, very late in life, if at all. So it's good that you got that early. Do you remember the first time? So my son plays the cello, as you know. You actually helped me string his first cello, I believe. Do you remember when you got your first, quote, real instrument, like an instrument that wasn't a student, or not even the smaller sizes, but just this is a real, actual cello?
Well, I remember that I think I started taking private lessons, and my teacher at the time told my parents, we really need to get her own cello. And we went into this really dusty, musty old violin shop in Oakland I think it was called Asher Violins. And I distinctly remember that smell. But we went in there, and there was this sort of little red cello, and I thought, oh, that's the one. And I think we actually bought it for like $250. And it was like, oh, that was so cool. So yeah, I definitely remember having that first sense of, wow, this is mine. I can make it, it sounds better than what I'm using at school. And you get a sense of, sort of personal involvement, I think, when you have your first instrument that doesn't belong to anybody else, that you are responsible for. It's kind of like getting your first dog, You have to take care of it. You have to make sure you don't sit on the bow. You have to put it away, And I think for a younger person, that's also a wonderful way to sort of learn responsibility. And that goes along with becoming part of an orchestra, is how you take care of not only yourself, your instrument, but then it kind of that sense of respect for the music, for your colleagues, for the conductor, just for the whole organization, I think becomes just imbued from a very early age, which I think is really important. And that also adds to just the overall joy and sense of unity that we as an orchestra have.
Oh, such a great point. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I have to circle back. You're the second person on this podcast now to mention the smell of their instrument or the shop they were in. And I think people are going to think musicians are crazy, but I actually watched a video of a guitarist who got a brand new Gibson delivered straight from the factory, an ES335. It's beautiful, red. It's the one from the Back to the Future that he plays on stage. And the first thing he does in this unboxing video is smell the varnish. And it's like, I guess it's like a visceral connection we have to these things that we hold in our hands for hours every day. So I just think I had to mention that's hysterical. So you went to Berkeley High School, you got your first real cello. College, what happened after that? Where did you go?
Well, I went to UCLA for 2 years, and a lot of it was I had friends, and there are people from my time in high school, from youth orchestra and from Berkeley High, who all went on to become professional musicians, which I think is probably more unusual than it is usual. So, we had an extremely high level of player, and there were a lot of people who were going to conservatories and stuff like that. And at the time I thought I wasn't ready to quite commit to the idea of becoming a musician. So I chose to go to UCLA because I thought, first of all, I started studying with, I was accepted into the studio of Gabor Raito, who was teaching at the time at USC. But I thought, well, I can go to UCLA, I can study privately with Raito, and kind of check all the boxes. So I did that for 2 years. I was a music major there. And after 2 years, I decided, I think I need to move to USC. Mainly because, I knew they had a great program. It was a performance-oriented school, which UCLA was not at the time. And I felt like I really needed to be in a more performance situation where I was around other people who were going to be performers, who wanted to be, professional musicians. So that's when I made the switch. So I transferred over to USC when I was a junior, and then that's where I graduated from.
What was that education like as far as scope? Was it, focusing on cello technique and solo repertoire and chamber music and excerpts, or was there more to it?
I think mainly I went to become a better cellist. I played chamber music like from the very beginning. In fact, there was a class, it was actually a graduate class for accompanists, and they needed string players or other instrumentalists to join it. And I was in that class for 2 years. And I think for me, the idea of being a collaborative musician was really much more inviting. It was much more, it was much more who I was going to be, to work with other people, whether it was, I didn't like the idea of just becoming a soloist. Not that I ever could have, but that was just not who I was. And again, we had an incredible orchestra at USC. In fact, we did Mahler 6 when I was at USC. So, I was immediately, you just sort of plunged into the idea of playing in an orchestra and the incredible things and repertoire that playing in an orchestra allows you to be part of, which you can't when you're playing in a quartet or solo stuff. It's just a completely different animal.
Who would you say is sort of the biggest mentor from that period of your life for the cello?
Well, certainly my teacher, Gabor Raito, was a phenomenal teacher. I learned so much from him. And, when I think back on our lessons, so much of what he did was not telling me what to do, but also kind of showing me. And being in that studio and hearing the sounds and thinking, oh, so much of it, I think, music and teaching music, and I'm finding this in my own teaching, is not necessarily giving somebody the nuts and bolts, like put your hand here, make your fingers do this. There is a certain amount of that. But if you can give your students this sense of imagination and sort of the mystery that comes with playing an instrument, playing music, and manipulating sound, I think that's an incredible gift that a teacher can give to a student, is making them aware of that aspect of music. I was also really lucky to study for one semester with Ron Leonard, who was the principal cellist of the LA Philharmonic. He had just come in to become principal right around the time I was at USC, and Raito had taken a sabbatical. So they had engaged Ron, and he agreed to teach 4 students. And when I found that out, I went running down there to sign up. And Ron was instrumental in opening my ears, getting me to understand the analytics of playing the cello and just the incredible level, high level that he demanded was revelatory. You know, he really made me listen to, I would play something and he goes, well, you know, what about that? Or was that really what you wanted to sound like, you know? And so I think what Ron gave me was the ability to really hear what I was doing and to be able to analyze. He taught me how to analyze, how to take things apart, find out what exactly is the wrong thing, well, not the wrong thing, what's the one thing that's not working, fix that, put it back together. And that is like just key to how I teach also, is being able to identify, analyze, and fix.
There's no doubt that everything that you're talking about is critical. It's the foundation, it's the building blocks. You have to learn all this stuff. But what I find amazing is that in no part of your description of your education was there a point where someone said, at some point in time, if your goal is to be in an orchestra, you're going to have to learn how to actually get a job, because the audition process is so different than everything that you're talking about right now. And if you want to add another layer to it, which is, I mean, we can talk about this later, what our current role and responsibility is as musicians, as artists, as advocates for the arts, is how to actually go out and talk to other people about what we do. I think those are critical pillars of being successful, not just getting the job, but sustaining the energy and the connection, which is the whole point of art in the first place. We get zero training about that. And I find that amazing. So we can talk about that more later. But what was your first audition that you took, other than school?
The first audition I took was San Francisco Symphony.
Wow, that's a pretty big place to start.
That was a pretty big place to start. I'm not sure how I even knew about it. But this was during my senior year at USC. I had studied that fall semester with Ron Leonard. We hadn't gone through excerpts or anything at all. And then I found out about this audition. By that time, Raita was back. And I said to him, I said, I would really love to take this audition. Do you mind if I study this excerpt list with Ron Leonard? And he said, no, that's fine, you know. And this is one of those things where, you know, as teachers are really careful not to like step on our students, whoever else they want to study with, or to try and poach students or anything like that. But he was totally fine, because he realized, of course, that he had no real knowledge about or how to prepare orchestral excerpts. So then I went and I took maybe 3 or 4 lessons, and I showed Ron the list, and we went through most of it. He sent me on his way. But what was so amazing, and what I will always be so grateful for, was that I was smart enough to actually ask Ron Leonard to help me with excerpts, because who better to ask? And the other thing was, he would sit down with me and we'd look at excerpts, and he goes, okay, this is why they're asking this particular excerpt, you know, and he would show me, you know, make sure you don't do this. Make sure you don't rush here. Or, you know, he was able to show me that playing excerpts is not just about playing the notes. You know, you have to know a lot more. You have to understand the context, you know, and you have to also know what else is going on in the orchestra, so that you as a player, even though you're playing by yourself an excerpt, can hear the rest of the orchestra and fit in, which is critical. So he really helped me. I took my first audition. I went out there, you know, this was at the War Memorial Opera House. So, you know, our dressing rooms are in the rafters. It's smelly, it's dusty, you know, it's everything you think an old opera house would be. You know, the personnel manager comes down, sits you down on the stage. I don't even remember whether there was a screen or anything at the time. But so I played a little bit, you know, then they asked me to do something. I think it was like Heldenleben, which I hadn't really prepared well. And I just like nosedived. It was just sort of like, okay. So I thought, well, that was my first one. I really have very little other memory of that. But when I came back and I was talking to Ron about it, I told him what happened during the audition. I said, then they asked, you know, like Heldenleben. I didn't really know that one. And what he said to me just has always stuck with me. And he said, well, I really should have prepared you better. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And as I look back on it, I realized, you know, as a teacher, when somebody is going through this sort of situation, you know, they have no idea what to expect. You know, I mean, of course, we on the other end of it know absolutely the things that they should know. But as a young person, and at the time I was, 21, going in for my first audition, I didn't know anything. I had no idea what was going on. And so the fact that he said to me, I should have prepared you better, tells me that, he, first of all, he took an incredible amount of responsibility and care that, he was going to actually prepare me for this audition. So that is also something that has always stuck in my mind, is how much responsibility we as teachers have to tell our students, because it is not something that you would learn necessarily in your normal studies of like Beethoven sonatas or concertos. How to play an excerpt is a completely alien thing if you've never done it.
It's a big job, right? You're teaching how to play the instrument. You're teaching the nuances of chamber music and working with others. And you're trying to teach excerpts in this and how to put them in context. And you're trying to teach audition strategy. And actually, depending on the relationship you have with your teacher, you're kind of like a life coach. You're helping them deal with the stress and the defeat and the feelings of failure and all that stuff. It's a huge, huge job. I think I have this picture in my mind of what music education could look like for the orchestral track musician. And it would include an instrumental teacher. It would include an audition coach. It would include a mentor coach just for dealing with stress. It would include a nutritionist. It would include someone to help you stay physically fit, like a gym trainer. I mean, there's so many pieces that I just posted today on Instagram about how musicians wear so many hats. You're a travel manager, you're your time manager, nutrition, sleep, all these things. It's so complex, and yet the focus for most conservatory life students is learn how to play your instrument great, master your instrument, and all the other stuff comes or it doesn't. And I think the people who stumble into unlocking those things, or even just being aware of them, are the ones that are sitting on stages and orchestras.
I think you're right. And the thing that is so different about an actual orchestral audition than any other performance is, first of all, you have maybe 5 minutes to show what you have been working on for years. You have to be able to bring all of your mental energy and focus and be able to deliver at that moment. I call this moment right before, when you're standing on stage and you're about to start playing an audition. I call that the tip of the spear. And the reason why I call it that is because that is that moment that you bring all these different things, whether it's your mental, all the mental work you've done to prepare, your technical aspect to really, you're going to show everything that you've worked on technically, and your artistic and imaginative self. All those three things have to come together at that moment. And when the personnel manager steps away and you start playing, that's when it all has to come together. So that's a really critical moment, because as you know, if you've taken an audition, you don't have a lot of time to kind of futz around and get comfortable. You have to hit it and go. And that is a very different sort of feeling and way you have to prepare, as opposed to playing a recital. A recital is going to be, 60 to 70 minutes long. You have time to kind of relax into it. You get to choose what it is you're playing, right up front. And you give yourself that kind of buffer to get a feel of the room and get a feeling of what am I doing and how am I sounding? And in an audition, you're stepping onto a stage where you've never been before. It's going to sound different. It's going to feel different. It's going to look different. And yet you have to bring just your very best right at that moment. And that takes a lot of work, not only practicing, but mental preparation and all these other things that often you don't realize until you step on stage. And this is why sometimes people get on stage and they don't do their best, because they haven't either been in that situation, so they don't really know what it is they have to do to prepare, and all the different things that can go wrong, not necessarily go wrong, but sort of the situational things that might throw them. Maybe they were thinking they were going to play 30 minutes later and they didn't quite prepare in this right way, or maybe it's a little cold on stage, or maybe the chair isn't quite what you're used to. So, when we're preparing for an audition, we need to take all these things into account so that when we get on stage, nothing can really, like, we've done it all. We've like gone through it all. We've played when it's really cold, really hot, really uncomfortable in too tight clothes, with your feet that hurt, all sorts of things like that. So that when you get there, nothing can really, you've gone through it all.
You reminded me of a story of when I auditioned for Tanglewood in Boston. And I showed up at the appropriate time. I think I showed up an hour early. Yeah, and they wouldn't let me in the building. And so I'm standing, and if you know Symphony Hall in Boston, if you're familiar with this concert hall, the waiting area for Symphony Hall is about the size of a large closet. And it's right next to these really old doors that don't keep the cold out. And I was just standing there freezing for 45 minutes. And I finally said to the guard, I said, please, my audition's in 15 minutes. Can I go down? I need to warm up. And she said, oh, I didn't realize you were waiting for that. And so she finally paged someone who brought me downstairs into these Wenger practice rooms that are in the basement of that building next to some kind of heater that was just boiling me alive. So I walked into the Wenger room. I shut the door. I had about 30 seconds to sort of collect myself. I took my E-flat trumpet out of the case because I was going to play a concerto. I put the mouthpiece in, and all of a sudden I hear a knock at the door. And I turn around, and it's Roger Voisin, the former principal trumpet of the Boston Symphony and trumpet icon, who was running the auditions. And he said, are you ready? And before I could even answer, he spun around on his heels and he said, if you're not ready now, you'll never be ready. And he walked away. And so I walked after him carrying my E-flat trumpet, no warm up. I couldn't decide if I was freezing or boiling or sweating. And I went in, and I totally didn't get into Tanglewood that year because I wasn't prepared. I had no idea that was going to happen. Mark my words, the following year when I went for my Tanglewood audition, I was ready to stand in a freezer or in an oven, and I did get into Tanglewood that year. So you're absolutely right that we don't know what to expect, and we have to be prepared for whatever comes. So you mentioned San Francisco is your first audition. You want to bring your best at that moment. Do you remember the first time you advanced at an audition? Or is there a memorable audition that when you came out and they said, we'd like to announce, I wish I had a job for everyone today. Unfortunately, I don't. Congratulations, candidate number 37. We'd like to invite you to a trial week. And that was you.
I think probably that was when I won the Denver Symphony audition. Yeah, I don't think they brought us back to talk to the committee or the conductor or anything. The personnel manager just came out. I think there were maybe 4 or 5 of us that were left there. And he said, I think he said, congratulations, Gloria, you got the job. And what I remember from that was I was totally like, wow, really? I don't know that I thought that I would played well enough to get it, but they gave me the job. And there was another candidate there, this woman, and she turned to me and she said, I'm so glad you got it. And I was really struck by that. I thought, how nice that, somebody who I went up against just said, I'm so glad you won it. And, just what I remember more than winning the job was the generosity of this colleague who I had no idea who it was, and I still don't know who it was, where she ended up, would turn to me and say that. So I think that's what really stood out in my mind in that audition.
Just fun fact, that never happens at trumpet auditions. and if a trumpet player did say that to you, the next thing they would do is go slash your tires on the way out of the building. So I love that you had that. No, I'm kidding, but it is pretty competitive for sure. What percentage of candidates who show up for an audition, and I'm talking about your experience now sitting on the other side of the curtain as an audition committee member, how many of them actually know what they're doing? Is it 50-50? Is it 80-20? Is it 90-10? What would you say?
Well, I've been sitting on committees for a really long time. And also I sat on the audition committee for a while when I was in Denver. And I have to say that as time has gone on, people have become much better players. And I think that people are beginning to understand what is involved. So these days, it is very rare that someone will come out and bomb. People play well. Also, I think there's a sense where people kind of self-select, where they know if there's the LA Philharmonic or the Boston Symphony or some major orchestra that is looking for a player, I think players who really are like, yeah, I don't think that's for me, no, and they don't necessarily apply. Plus, we have a pretty strict screening process. But I think more and more, the level of playing has gone up so much. I would say for any, especially like if you're talking about like a section string audition, We'll get anywhere from 80 to 130 applications, and maybe anywhere from 60 to 90 people who actually come or who are invited. And I'd say of those people, of that group, maybe 8 to 10 people could easily do the job, because the playing level overall is just really high. So you might ask, well, then why does only one person out of 8 or 10 really qualified people get the job? And the answer is, it has to do with how you play on that day. Because now, of course, all of our auditions are completely blind, and most orchestras, they keep the screen up till almost the very, very end. And for us in the LA Philharmonic, we actually keep the screen up through the superfinals too. So until we're ready to offer the job, we actually never see the person. But I think that because of that, all we have to go on is every little moment that you play in an audition. And you want to be able to not only hit all your technical marks, because at this point, anybody who gets into the superfinal is like a fantastic player. Just technically speaking, they are a fantastic player. And so what we're looking for at that point is who can speak to us as musicians. Who has that imagination? And you may ask yourself, well, this is just a section position. Really? Do I need to be playing like Yo-Yo Ma? And the answer is no, of course, you don't have to play like Yo-Yo Ma, because none of us can play like Yo-Yo Ma. But what you have to do is be able to show your own particular imagination, your artistic vision. And just playing the notes well, in tune, perfectly, all that is not good enough anymore. And in fact, I think that if you were to talk to most people in an audition committee, given the choice between someone who plays like a note perfect audition, where you can say, there's really nothing I can say about, to knock this person out, and somebody who plays maybe a little less than perfect, who maybe has a little bit of a smear here or there, but just moves the committee, that's the person that's going to get the job. So while we prepare for an audition, it's not, you do absolutely need to nail down all the technical aspects of your playing. But along with that, you need to be able to imbue your own artistic vision and be able to connect past the screen, across the audience, across a concert hall with the person who's listening to you. And that is what we're looking for in a major symphony orchestra.
And we'll be right back. I want to give a huge thanks to the sponsor of the Honesty Pill podcast, Yamaha Corporation of America. I've been playing Yamaha equipment for decades in my own practice room, on stage with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, or touring all over the world, and Yamaha has been an absolute game changer. Something I love about Yamaha is the way they pursue excellence in all of their work and at all levels. They are as dedicated to bringing quality work for beginning students as they are for marquee artists. I admire their commitment to continuous improvement and creating a community that includes all of the musicians they serve. Make every note count, play Yamaha. Okay, let's get back to the show. So as complicated as audition strategy can be, it's not rocket science. And you would know because you're married to someone who's actually surrounded by rocket scientists and spends his days making documentaries about what goes on at the Jet Propulsion Lab right here in Pasadena. Sometimes I wonder what conversations you two are having about cello excerpts over breakfast. Can you explain sort of a helicopter view of the audition process, maybe for someone who has never taken an audition, or maybe even someone who's not a musician? What does the process go? Is it like a Broadway show? Is it like a business interview? How does it look?
Well, first of all, the first thing you do is you find out that an orchestra is holding an audition. So you send in a resume, and what they do is they'll look at your resume and they'll tell you the dates. They'll often send you the excerpt list. The excerpt list is a list of anywhere from 10 to 20 different short pieces that are taken from the orchestral repertoire. And you are expected to prepare those along with a couple of solos. And what happens is, if you are invited to an audition, you get there, you get into a room or something, they give you a list of maybe, this is for the preliminary round, you'll play maybe part of a solo and maybe 4 excerpts. And so you prepare that, you go out on stage, you play your thing, you come back, and usually you wait for about an hour or an hour and a half. The committee will talk about maybe 6 to 8 candidates. They vote on them. And on our side, you need to have at least 50% of the committee saying, yes, I want to hear this person again. And that's how you move into the next round. So as you go from round to round, the excerpt list changes. You may have to play more of your solo. And generally, your time on stage gets a little bit longer because every time you're called back, it means that the committee is interested in hearing more of what you can do. And then we finally get to the finals where it's whittled down. So if we start like with 100 people in a preliminary audition, then maybe you get to 15 semi-finalists, and then maybe after the semi-final round, it might get whittled down to 8 finalists. And usually in our orchestra, the finals is when the music director steps in. So up until that point, you're only playing for a committee that goes anywhere from 7 to 14 people, depending on the orchestra and how they run their committees, how they put together their audition committees. And when generally when the finals come in, sometimes at that point, an orchestra might elect to take down the screen. And like I said, it's different. Every orchestra has a different set of rules that they use. But often if you have like 8 finalists, they might then say, we want to hear these 3 people. And that's called the super finals. And in the super final round, then at that point, often the music director will talk to the person who's on stage and ask them to do certain things. Sometimes there may be a chamber music round where you're asked to play with colleagues in maybe a quartet or a brass quintet, woodwind quintet, whatever, depending on what the instrument being auditioned for is. So that's generally the way it goes. There's usually a discussion, after the candidates have played, we go around, we talk about who we like, who we think is best suited. And generally it comes down to either a vote and or the music director deciding to just offer someone the job on the spot or invite that candidate to come in and play with the orchestra before they're offered the job.
You mentioned voting and discussion.
Mm-hmm.
What is the process of voting in like a prelim? How do committees decide in that moment whether or not they want to hear someone or whether or not they're done?
Well, generally, because prelims go on for such a long time, there is no discussion. And basically what we're listening for, and I think most people on the committee have the same 4 or 5 things that they're listening for. For me, it's intonation, rhythm, sound, and style. So those are the 4 things that I'm listening for. If you don't play in tune, you're out. If you don't play in rhythm, you're out. If you don't have a sense of style, or if you don't really understand where you fit in, where your part fits in, I'd say that's probably a way to get eliminated. And then something that's very, I think, personal is somebody's sound. Are they able to manipulate their sound to show you different colors, to show you different dynamics? And I think this can be a tricky moment, I think, for people on stage, for the candidate, because how soft should that pianissimo be? How loud should that fortissimo be? And it's different because sometimes we feel like we have to really push, especially if we can't see the other people. And what I always tell my clients is nobody else is playing. They're going to hear everything you do. They can hear you breathe. So, you have to be able to feel comfortable enough to kind of scale your own dynamics. When you're looking at fortissimo, and I'm sure it's different for trumpet players than it is for cellists, you don't need to push. What you need to show is just a good sense of dynamic range. You don't want to hurt us, okay? So be mindful of that. And that's where sort of doing these ideas of understanding how you feel when you're in an audition and being able to kind of modulate your reaction and not get freaked out because you're suddenly playing in a hall as opposed to playing in a dressing room and changing things around. So that's a lot of what we work on in preparation.
How do you keep members of the committee from sort of, like if it's a trumpet audition and I'm on that committee and you're a cellist, you would think that I would want to enforce my opinion about who should go on more because I'm a trumpet player and I know more about it perhaps, right? Even though that's not true. What keeps the fairness in the voting process in that moment?
Well, first of all, unless it's the finals, we're not talking to each other. But the other thing is, what I'll often do, and I used to do this when I was chair, is if we're playing, if like I'm in the middle of a horn audition, before it all starts out, I ask the principal to let's go through the excerpt list. What should we be listening for? What are the things that what are the particular things that I as a cellist or maybe a percussionist or maybe a flute player are not aware of, and do we need to be? So we have a general sense of what it is we're listening for. So we're not coming into it completely blind. But I think all great musicians can hear intonation, rhythm, sound and style. I mean, if you're playing for members of a major symphony orchestra, we've heard it all. We know what great playing sounds like. We know the sounds we're looking for. So while you may not necessarily be playing always for a person who plays your instrument, you're also playing for other great musicians who know great playing when they hear it and can certainly understand just the basics.
What's your opinion on asking to play an excerpt over again? So you're on stage, you've played 3 excerpts that went great, and the 4th one, you just had a total misfire. What do you do?
I think it's fine. I think it's fine. I would say sometimes someone will play something and maybe there's something kind of, it wasn't perfect, and they'll say, can we play it again? And we always say, yes, of course, go ahead, because it's going to, take 30 seconds or 45 seconds. And we always want to make the candidate feel as comfortable as possible. Does it change if they then nail it? And I would say, then I would say, okay, well, they can play it. But I've already made my sort of estimation and my judgment on what kind of player they are. So if I think this is a great player, they kind of missed that, that's not going to change how I feel about that player. So one tiny mistake is not going to derail you. And this is a really important thing for people to remember is we are listening for the whole musician. And we are all human. We all blow it once in a while. And the idea that you have to play a perfect audition in order to win a job is just not true. What you need to do is be a great musician and be able to have great control over your instrument. It doesn't always happen exactly, but we can tell the difference between a great musician who has a tiny slip and somebody who's just grabbing on to try and play it perfectly, but doesn't necessarily have that vision or that connection to the music or to others.
Can we talk about no hires for a minute? Because this happens a lot. And when it happens where an orchestra goes through the energy of advertising for a position, all these people come, we screen the resumes, they set up the committees, the hall is reserved, the committees show up, we go through the process, prelims, semis, finals, super finals. The music director comes in, there's hours of discussion, and then there's no hire. And of course, what happens in the musical community, the responses are, it was rigged, they didn't want to hire anybody, nobody's good enough for them, who do they think they are? What would you say to a candidate who participates in an audition where nobody gets hired?
Well, that is a really tough one, and nobody wants a no-hire audition because we have sat there for hours and hours just hoping. Part of me feels like playing an audition is a bit of a, it's not something you can control. All you can control as a candidate is how you play. And it is our hope on the other side that we hear candidates who show their very best because we really do want to hire somebody. We don't want to have to go through this process again. That being said, sometimes what happens, why does that happen? Because like I said earlier, you probably have a handful of people who could do that job. So in my experience, this is a hard one. Why do people not get hired? It comes down to maybe we're not agreeing on the style. Maybe there's nobody who has really rung our bells in that way. And there's always a hope, even when we're talking about a section position, that we can find somebody who will check all those boxes. Now, is it unreasonable to believe that that can happen? Not really, because we do hire people and we do find those people. And that also becomes its own sort of self-fulfilling prophecy when you then end up with 3 or 4 people in the superfinals that nobody can really get behind. And that will happen sometimes. And even though you say, oh, but that person played that so great, and that person just had really great spiccato, or this person was just really clean. When you have a fractured committee and there's no one person that really stands out, that is when often there will be a no hire. And it's really unfortunate, but that's why I say what we're looking for is someone to reach across that screen and grab our hearts and just like twist it out of our chests, because that's when we all go, yes, that's who we want. That is a fantastic player. And sometimes I think when people are too concerned about, I've got to make this perfect, it's a technical thing, they lose sight of the larger meaning of why do we play music? We play music because it is an expression of our emotional human selves, and if you take that aspect away, you're left with notes. And that's not what does it in the end, and that's unfortunate. But, I don't know what else to say. I think there are other factors that can go into not necessarily hiring somebody. For me, when I was running auditions, one of the things that I always wanted to do was be as generous as possible when passing people on from one rung to the next, one round to the next. Because if I thought, there's something about this person, I want to give them another chance, and if you have a committee that is willing to spend the time and is willing to be generous, I think the odds of finding the player you want is better. Just because sometimes if you get cut off really soon, like you make a mistake and you have a committee that's like grumpy or it's tired or it's 8 p.m. and everyone wants to go home, if had you played early in the day, maybe you would have gotten through. But at this point, they're like, oh God, I just want to get home. And unfortunately, we on the audition committee are also human, and we're dealing with schedules, we're dealing with all sorts of things. So for my money, having more people on the audition committee is actually better, because then you kind of balance that out. But I think that there is no perfect audition. I wish there was a way that we could just say, yeah, that's the person we want. Unfortunately, that no longer exists, and that's not always the fairest way to give everybody a shot at such an opening. So, we are constantly trying to refine the audition experience for everyone to try and find the best player. It's not perfect. It's just not a perfect system.
100% agree about being generous, because if you're not, the other outcome is that the music director is sitting there looking at 2 or 3 candidates who possibly there's a no hire, and the music director looks at the committee and like, this is what you brought for me today. So it's our job to see the possibility. You have to show up with a certain level for sure, but I'm all behind getting generous. Look, takeaway, the committee is rooting for you. They want you to play your best. They want to hire you and be super excited about working next to you for the next 20, 30 years. Do you have an opinion about asking the committee for comments if comments are offered at an audition?
I think asking for comments, it can be tricky because, first of all, unless you know someone on the committee that you trust, you don't know whose comments you're getting. And you don't know whether they're necessarily representative of what everybody thinks. So you're just talking to one person who may have one set of opinions. And I can tell you, having been in so many auditions, there are people who say, I love number 4. And other people who said, oh, really? I didn't get that at all. So, you're dealing with separate human beings with separate sets of expectations. So when you ask for comments, you're not going to get them from the entire committee. So there's no way for you to weigh, oh yeah, I guess that really was a problem, because 9 out of 12 people said that was a problem. I would be careful. I think sometimes it might be helpful. Somebody might say something, but in the end, really, what you need to do is be able to have a sense of how you played, and to put yourself through enough like mock auditions, played for enough people, listen to yourself, recorded yourself, and be able to say, yeah, that was out of tune, or yeah, I rushed that, I can hear that, and have all those bases covered before you go in, so that when you present yourself for an audition, you really do know how it is you're playing. And that's the other thing, is sometimes when we're in the throes of an audition or a performance, we kind of lose our sense of like, whoa, what's going on? Oh, how did that sound? And we can't remember. So part of preparing for an audition is to put yourself into so many of those sort of like mock audition scenarios that you can like have your brains with you and have your sense of like what's really going on here, so that when you go on stage, you do have a sense of how you played. You should be able to walk off stage and say, yeah, I nailed that, or yeah, that was a little bit, that could have been a little bit better. So my goal would be to say that you are the final arbiter of how your audition went. And in the end, really, that's all you have control over. You only have control over how you played. What happens after that? You have no idea who else is playing. You don't know what the committee, what they're saying or how they're receiving all the other input they're getting. So instead of coming back from a committee, back from an audition and saying, I thought I played well, I didn't get anywhere, I must be an awful player. That is not the way that we want to approach auditions. I really feel like if you can walk off that stage and say, yeah, that's it, I left it out there, that's how I play. If they don't like it, oh well, that's when you should make your own decision. You take your win then, not when somebody else gives you their opinion. So believe in yourself, believe in yourself, believe in your ability to do well. Set your own standards, go after your own standards. And I'd say that's the most healthy way to get through an audition lifestyle.
This is brilliant. This is such good stuff. Oh, I could talk to you for 3 hours about this. Let's leave the topic of auditions for a moment, because I want to ask you a few more things just about being a cellist in an orchestra. What's it like to be a section player? You've mentioned being a section player and the approach you would take at an audition for a section job versus a principal job. What do you like about being a section player? What do you dislike about it?
What I love about being a section player is you're part of a whole, and I think that playing in a section has its own particular qualities. My job as a section player is to blend my sound and to be always aware of where the section is and to be able to fit with it, to kind of ebb and flow. When you're sitting with somebody who you can connect with, who kind of breathes with you, there's this sort of invisible bond that happens, even if you don't talk to each other, which often happens. But, you can sit next to somebody and know exactly where they're going to put everything. And that is so much fun to be able to absolutely match somebody, even when they're not expecting it, and it's like putting out your little spidey senses and going, I'm going to connect to all these different people. And it's like playing chamber music, and that's what playing in a section makes it a lot of fun. And I'm thrilled to not ever have to worry about playing solos. So I would never be like a great principal player or something, because it's like too scary, especially when you're talking about a major symphony orchestra. The downside, I think sometimes if people don't really get that sense of connection, which I think is like the main reason why we should be playing music, connection to your colleagues, connection to the soloists, to other sections, that it can become really boring and it can be kind of feel like, oh, nobody hears what I'm doing. And that's really only if you're not trying. If you're not really trying to put out and connect, then what's the point, and nobody's going to connect back to you. So being a good section player is like being a good friend. You want to be open. You want to be willing to have people connect with you and to respond back and to kind of play. And that is so much fun. So that's why I like playing in an orchestra. It's because I like playing with my friends.
I love being a section player also. And the thing about, oh, no one can hear me. There is a funny thing, and this is probably more true in winds and brass than in the string section, is the sort of iconic status that the principals get. And I'll throw a challenge out to you right now, listener. If you can think of 5 orchestral second trumpet players, go ahead and email that to me right now off the top of your head, because I bet you can't, because everyone knows who the principals are. I mean, it's like we even study the first trumpet parts, but not ever the section parts, even though the section parts have a whole different skill set involved. So I never knew I was going to enjoy playing section until I got here to the LA Phil, and I love it. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I like being really close to the fire. It's like when you're making a s'more and that marshmallow is just about to burst into flames, but it doesn't. I feel like that's what my job is. And I get to watch other people just jump right into it. Can I hit you with some rapid fire questions, Gloria?
Sure.
Okay. Number 1, what is a common myth about our industry or getting a job in our industry that you want to debunk?
That you have to be a perfect player in order to get a job.
That's a great one. All right. What is better about the music industry now than when you first started out?
I think that with the advent of the internet and online teaching, you have access to so many more great teachers, great players than you could have ever imagined. And I think that you should always use the internet as much as you can as an educational tool, just to like open up your mind as to what's possible and what other people are doing.
Yeah, great point. I mean, just the fact that you have a smartphone in your pocket that can do all of the things in your practice room, recording yourself, metronomes, tuners, slowing your practice down, looking up things on YouTube. It's a Swiss Army knife that we just didn't have. Number 3, if you had to do it all over again, would you pursue the same career path?
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, great answer. What's a goal you'd like to achieve in the next 5 years?
Oh, that's a good one. You know, I'm always trying to play better, you know, and there are always challenges, playing challenges. So yeah, I would love to work on some stuff and get it to the place that I'd like it to be. I feel now that I'm a better player than I was, you know, when I got the job. I just have a wider set of knowledge. The other thing is I would love to do just more teaching. I think passing on your experience and what you've learned and to help other younger players, especially those who are now entering the field, is something that I would like to do more of.
That's a great segue into my last few questions here, which is obviously, listener, you can tell Gloria is an expert about audition strategy, what it's like to be on a committee, what it's like to play for a committee. And now you've actually created a way that you can share that information with other musicians and cellists. Can we talk about the complete cellist and the 360 method to audition preparation? Who is it for? What do they get out of it? What are you trying to communicate in that program that you have coming up?
Well, I have run a couple of programs that were very targeted towards the excerpts that cellists have to learn, which I think is an incredible something that everybody needs to know is like getting answers to a test beforehand to study excerpts with somebody who really understands it and who has to listen to it. But I've realized in my teachings that there are all these other things that we have to bring together in order to have a successful audition. So not only do you need to know and be able to play your excerpts, but like I said earlier, the mental aspect of actually getting you there. How do you prepare? How do you set up your timeline? I have something called the audition countdown timeline, which kind of will give you a specific way how you should be practicing, what you should be working on, how you should approach basically an upcoming audition, which is not unlike getting ready for a marathon. So organization is another key thing. If you can organize yourself and your materials, just goes a long way in terms of getting yourself ready in the right amount of time. And the last pillar of my 360 method after the technical and the mental is the artistic. And I think many times if we can sort of explore more in depth what it is we're trying to say, what it is we're trying to get across, whether it's an emotion, a particular kind of sound, those things happen away from your instrument. It has to do with just opening up your brain to all sorts of other possibilities. Because my feeling is, if we're going to try and play an excerpt, you want to know right up front, what am I trying to get across? What is the feeling? What is the visual? What's the sound? And if we know what it is we want beforehand, then we can work towards it. But if we start at the bottom, what's this note? Oh, that's kind of out of tune. We may never make that leap to getting that artistic vision that we have across. So I think that that's kind of work that takes place away from the cello. It's a way of expanding your own particular expressive and artistic vocabulary, which sometimes gets lost when we get caught up in the weeds.
So is this a program that you're teaching at your college, or is it in person? Where is this happening?
Well, it's an online program that's actually starting very soon in March. It's a 14-week program. It'll be all online. And we go through the different pillars. So we go through organization and timelines, how to practice, mock auditions, recordings. And then I've also asked a wonderful professor from IU, from Indiana University, named Frank Diaz. And Frank has a class that he teaches at IU, which is all about mindfulness and performance. So what he does is we talk about what happens when you're actually performing, and what are the things that we can do that can help us, really be more mindful, more present, and not get caught up in all the mental sort of stuff that happens when we get nervous. So that's a whole big part of the course too. Then there's the expression, the artistic and imaginative expression. I'm also really, really excited because I have two incredible cellists who will be giving master classes. One is Blaise Desjardins, who is the principal cellist of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, will be giving a master class. And the other one is Mark Kossauer, who is the principal cellist of the Cleveland Orchestra. So I think the ability to hear what these amazing players have to say, to be able to play for them, is certainly, an opportunity that I'm looking forward to. I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to say about just cello playing in general, and also how they, as principal cellists, look at auditions and what they're looking for. So that's basically the program.
You've got some pretty heavy hitters coming in to help you out with that.
Yeah, I am really super excited.
And if people want to find out more about this, I can't believe we haven't actually mentioned your website, which is auditionconfidential.com. Why did you name your coaching practice Audition Confidential? I love that name.
Thanks. I took inspiration from Kitchen Confidential, of course, which was I can't remember what's the name, and the idea that there's all these sorts of things that people who are taking auditions don't necessarily know. And it is no secret. All you need to do is ask somebody. All the musicians I know who are professional are almost always eager to tell you about their experiences, what they found out, and I don't think it should be a secret, because if you want to win an audition, if you want to be prepared, you need to know the situation that you're stepping into. And the more information you can have prior to that, the better you'll be, the better prepared you'll be, the less scary it will be. And that's my goal, is just to help people through that very difficult step of taking an audition and making it something that is less than terrifying and hopefully more full of joy. I know that sounds kind of weird, but if we can approach an audition like a performance and have the same goals, which is to create joy and to connect musically and emotionally with those around us, then it kind of takes the onus off, I have to get this job, because remember, you have no control over whether you actually get the job. All you can do is play your very best. And that would be my goal for anybody taking an audition. Just play your very best.
Creating joy through music. What a revolutionary idea. Gloria Lum of Audition Confidential. All right, last question. If there existed an actual honesty pill that you could take and it would change one thing about you instantly, this could be adding a superpower or a skill or removing a weakness like your kryptonite, what would it be?
I would say I would like an honesty pill that would help me not be terrified of technology.
Ooh, that is a popular one, the fear of tech. I bet a lot of people would say, yes, please, and thank you. Give me one of those. Gloria, where can people find out more about you? Where can they book a call to talk about the program coming up? Where is everything located? Well,
you can find me at www.auditionconfidential. You can also just email me directly at gloria@auditionconfidential.com. So yeah, I would love to talk to you. I love to talk to people, find out what their audition story is, what they need help on. I love the one-on-one conversations and relationships that I develop with my clients. I get very invested in their well-being.
Awesome. Gloria, thank you for spending time. I know this is one of your days off this week, and I'll see you tomorrow on stage. I love the work you're doing. I'm inspired by what you're doing. I'm excited to see the 360 program kick off, and just thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
All right, take care. Bye. Big thanks to Gloria Lum of Audition Confidential for taking some time and dropping in here to pull back the curtain on audition strategies, audition practices, and why sometimes people just don't get hired. And I want to circle back to one thing Gloria said during our interview. The committee is rooting for you. They're hopeful. They've been sitting there for days and days listening to musicians, hoping that you are the one. I think it's worth considering as an audition candidate adopting the mindset of this committee is rooting for me instead of this committee is waiting for me to make a mistake so they can send me home empty-handed. I know I struggled with that mindset when I first started taking auditions, and now that I've sat on the other side of the curtain, I can guarantee we want you to play great. I love a good structured process, and Gloria's 3 pillars for audition success is a must-have. I hope you all sign up for her mailing list right now over at auditionconfidential.com. And if you really want a deep dive into these topics, including the 3 pillars, organization, how to practice, mock auditions, recording, book a free discovery call with Gloria today, because her program, the 360 Method to Audition Preparation, is starting in just a few weeks. I have a quick challenge for you. I want to know what your biggest takeaway from this episode was, and if you're listening on your phone, here's what I want you to do. Grab a quick screenshot of this episode and post it on Instagram or Facebook and tag me at HonestyPill. Let me know what your takeaway was. What resonated with you most in this episode? I'd love to hear from you, and I always respond to every single message. All right, this has been Honesty Pill Podcast, episode 30. You can find out more at honestypill.com. It's raining cats and dogs here in Southern California, so I'm going to go outside and jump in some puddles. Thank you for listening. See you next time.